On Tuesday, the 20th of October 1998, Lyn Bryant, 41, was murdered as she was walking her dog at Ruan High Lanes near Truro on the Roseland Peninsula in Cornwall. Her body was discovered that afternoon at 2:40. She had been stabbed several times with a short, sharp knife.
I'm Stuart Ellis. I'm a Senior Investigating Officer with Devon and Cornwall Police. I've dealt with many major investigations and latterly have been involved in reviewing some undetected cases, of which this is one. A local woman, she was born on the Roseland and actually was living in the house that she was born in at the time of her murder. She was 5 days short of her 41st birthday when she was murdered. She lived at home with her husband. She had 2 daughters, one who still lived at home, who was 19 at the time, and an older daughter, Lee, who was 21. On the morning of her murder, Lyn worked locally as a cleaner. Lyn returned home from work. She then popped out in her car, which was a grey Sierra, and went to a local garage. First of all, she went to what was known as Harris Garage, which was a Esso filling station. I think she got there around 12:45, 12:40. When she got to the Esso station, they didn't have the fuel that she needed. So she then left that petrol station and went to one which was a bit nearer her home address, which was known at the time as Treviles Garage. She got there around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She bought some fuel and some groceries, including milk, and then she went back to her home address, which was just a short distance away. When she got back to her home, her daughter Erin was then there because she'd returned from work, and they sat and chatted for a short time about Lyn's up-and-coming birthday. Shortly after, it was Lyn's habit to take their dog Jay, a lurcher, out for a walk. Her main one was to walk from her home address down a quiet country lane towards Ruan High Lanes Chapel. She was seen by a number of witnesses as she was walking along that quiet lane, some of whom actually knew Lyn, and she walked down there, arriving at the junction of the road and the chapel, the road that led down to Treviles Manor. So a short time later, a witness was driving along that quiet lane towards the chapel junction, and she was seen by this witness around 2 p.m. When he saw a woman in conversation with a man. The woman was with a lurcher type dog. He can't describe the man in any detail other than a man in his 30s, no other distinguishing features. That was probably the last time that Lyn was seen alive by anybody. Later on that afternoon, a lady left Treviles Manor in her car and started to drive up towards the chapel. As she did so, she saw what she thought was a body lying in a gateway of a field a short distance between the Treviles Manor and the chapel. On seeing this, she immediately reversed back to the farmhouse and got some help and went back to the scene. And unfortunately, that was later found to be Lyn's body lying in that gateway of that field. The first call that the emergency services had about this was timed at 2:40 p.m. There was no attempt to conceal a body. It was lying in the gateway. The gateway is a area that had 3 gates to it and was regularly used at the time by the farmer to move cows around. What the witnesses saw when they saw Lyn's body there must have been horrific. It was a scene that I'm sure has stayed with them for the rest of their lives. Lyn was left lying in the gateway. There was blood coming from a wound to her neck. What we do know in relation to Lyn's injuries is that she was stabbed several times in several locations by her attacker. She had knife wounds to her back, she had knife wounds to her neck, and she was stabbed fatally in the chest. We know that she must have fought against her attacker. She had injuries to her face, and we know that her clothing was disturbed at the time that her body was found. When you look at the evidence of the injuries and the way that Lyn's body was found, I think it is a fair conclusion that this was a sexually motivated murder. The place that Lyn was murdered is a particularly remote part of Cornwall. It was at the time, in 1998, and it still is today, really. There's only one main road that goes from Tregony down to St Mawes, the A3078. The route that Lyn took for her last walk was off that main road into a really quiet area of the countryside. The location is not an area that you would expect somebody to stumble upon. It's more likely that somebody had a reason to be in that location, whether through work, whether through family connections, or whether some other connection to the area. But you would not expect somebody to wander into that area unexpectedly. The weapon that was used on Lyn has never been found. All indications are that it was a single-edged blade of around 3 to 5 inches long, around 10 to 14 centimetres, probably a penknife or a small kitchen knife. So after the call to the emergency services, the air ambulance was dispatched. A short time after the air ambulance arrived, another local farmer was in a nearby field tending to some of his cows. As he was doing so, he saw a man walking across a field which was nearby to the scene. That is a field that does not have a footpath in it and is not used by anybody for walking purposes in his experience. Was that man connected to Lyn's murder? Why was that man walking across the field? The farmer thinks that he saw that man between 3:15 and 3:15, so a very short time after Lyn was murdered. The man in the field and the man at the chapel have never been identified. Who were these people? Was the man in the field the same man that was seen talking to Lyn at the junction at the chapel shortly before her murder? There was an intensive forensic examination of the scene at the time and an intensive search that carried on for a number of days, weeks and months. What the investigation team did find was a number of blue fibres left over Lyn's body. It's a fair conclusion that those fibres were left by Lyn's attacker. What we know about those fibres is that they're a polyester cotton mix and they're of a vivid blue colour. Unfortunately, we've never been able to match them exactly to a garment, but we do know that they're fairly commonly used in polo shirts and sweatshirts. So Lyn must have spent some time in contact with her attacker. There must have been a struggle, there must have been blood. The gateway was muddy at the time, her clothing was mud splattered, and so it's very likely that whoever had attacked Lyn would have been in the same state, would have been in the same condition. There would potentially be blood transferred from Lyn to whoever attacked her, and certainly there would be mud. So anyone that was in that unusual and isolated area and returned home in any kind of different state, with mud, with anxiety, not really wanting to talk about what happened, that would be the sort of person that we'd be very interested in finding. We always review cases to see whether there's any new science that can help us and try and move the case forward. Back in 1998, the National DNA database was really in its infancy. It hadn't been used for very long in the criminal justice system. However, as we've progressed through the years, we have looked at exhibits again and seen whether we can use new techniques to try and move a case forward. And that's exactly what we've done with the murder of Lyn Bryant. So in doing that, we sat down closely with a forensic scientist and the investigation team, and we began to resubmit key exhibits that had been found in this case. We began to find common elements of DNA. So the work that we've undertaken now gives us the opportunity to look at that partial DNA profile. We believe that partial DNA profile has been left by Lyn's attacker, and we can use that to try and identify him. So what we need now from the public is a name, basically. It may be somebody that you've spoken to us about before. It may be somebody that has not come into the inquiry before. 20 years is a long time. Allegiances change. Things that have been lingering in the public's mind or in your mind for a number of years. Now's the time to come forward, because if we do get a name, we can actually do something with it. Yeah, so another part of this case that's never been resolved is that whilst Lynn was at Treviles garage getting a fuel and groceries, a white car-derived van was seen to pull onto the forecourt, not get any petrol, and sort of pull off a short time after Lynn left the garage forecourt. It was a scruffy white van. The reason we were so interested in that is because a van of that description had been previously seen around the area of the chapel. That van and the driver that's been described variously as a man with a scruffy beard, a full beard. If anybody's got any information now that will help us identify that van and that driver, then we'd very much like to hear about it. So the key information that I'm seeking now is to try and identify who was that man at the chapel speaking to Lynn shortly before she was murdered. Who was the man walking across the field? A very unusual occurrence. Was that the same man as the man that was at the chapel? And who was driving that white van, the man with the beard? I'd very much like to identify who that was. Another issue in this case is that on the 2nd of February 1999, some months after the murder, the same farmer that had discovered Lynn's body with the lady in her car found a pair of glasses in the same gateway of the field. Those glasses were subsequently identified as being Lynn's glasses. Now, I know that area, that crime scene was searched to a fingertip search. It's very unlikely that those glasses were missed in that search. So why were those glasses back in that field some months later in a position where they could only have been for a short period of time because they were on top of the mud? How did those glasses get put back there? Were they found by somebody and returned to the scene, or were they put back there by the murderer? Yeah, so what I'd be asking for is that anyone that's got any information that they think might be helpful to us, to however small, however insignificant you might think it is, it might be very important to us, and it might just provide us the piece of information that we're looking for that will find the identity of Lynn's killer.